Welcome to Allies or Enemies, where we look at games and how they work for two players. This time, we are looking at Anachrony, designed by David Turczi and published by Mindclash Games. Anachrony drops players into a post-apocalyptic world where people need to wear exosuits to survive the harsh new reality, and different groups vie to shape humanity's future as they prepare for another apocalypse from an impending asteroid impact. Players take on the role of one of four paths: harmony, dominance, salvation, and progress, collecting resources, building their cities, and using time travel to meet their goals and evacuate the planet, collecting points along the way. Also, we should point out that the retail version has cardboard exosuits that work fine, but for this review, we're going to use the expansion minis because they are awesome.
Anachrony is a complex game, but it does a good job explaining, and the first game starts with just the foundation and then adds stuff as you go. There are a lot more layers than we're going to discuss here, but most of your turn will be assigning workers to get stuff. The ones that go out to the planet need exosuits, the ones in your capital don't. The actions include building, recruiting, research, getting water, trading things, waking up workers, collecting power cores for exosuits, and traveling through time. Yep, there is time travel, and it's pretty cool. Players can borrow resources from the timeline, but need to later create a time machine to travel back and replace whatever they borrowed, or risk creating harmful anomalies. The point of all this is to prepare for the impending cataclysm by meeting the evacuation conditions for your faction. There's a lot more than that going on here, including specific worker powers and asymmetric boards. This is not something that you're going to break out for an hour on a casual gaming night, but it is all well laid out in the book, and there are excellent icons, and the system all makes sense. And once it clicks, it's worth it.
They simplified the core box since the Kickstarter to bring down the price, so no exosuits. But what does come in it is still pretty cool. The workers are great, the minerals are translucent cubes, the timeline is simple, but super effective. The various factions all have their own style with their flags and leaders. Everything fits into the cool post-apocalyptic theme, makes it easy to get immersed into the world. The iconography is also really effective and easy to grasp, and there are some nicely perfectly shaped spaces for workers or markers or cubes. It's a lot on the table between all the boards and bits, but it all fits together surprisingly well. And while the simple exosuits from the retail do their job and keep the costs down, if you like the game, it's worth getting the exosuit expansion just to put the workers into the slots.
Anachrony is an apocalyptic smorgasbord of optional modules and ways to heighten or lower complexity. Just the pure base game with the player boards on the beginner sides would be plenty. There are loads of buildings and projects and angles and paths to victory, but once you flip those boards, you have asymmetrical paths, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. You also have a choice of leaders with different powers, choice of endgame goals, and additions that add different ways to do the startup resources, or add further complexity to the timeline. And this would all be more than enough for most players, but if you do want even more than that, the classic expansion adds 3 more modules that add things like exosuit quests, a whole faction-based way to mess with the timeline, and third-party exosuits that fuse workers into them forever. Between the two boxes, there is so much here that it's recommended that you just choose a couple of these add-ons at a time, which makes for a lot of different combinations.
Anachrony works exceptionally well for 2. The main board flips to remove player slots and basically becomes a 2-player game. And the nature of the game is such that you're mostly focused on your own capital and workers and avoiding anomalies. You are competing for spaces in available buildings and jockeying for position on the timeline, but there isn't any direct take that in the game. So having more players mostly just means a bit more downtime and a bit more uncertainty for your plans. That said, it certainly doesn't feel like 2-player solitaire, but it's a complex enough puzzle that you'll be happy to not have too many wrenches in the works as you gather everything you need to survive the impending asteroid doom.
We actually held off on this one for a bit due to the complexity, but While it is a deep game, a lot of it's fairly intuitive, and it's quickly moved up very close to the top of both of our lists of favorite games. Between the timeline, the exosuits, and the various boards, it's a surprisingly cohesive and mentally immersive experience, and the theme really does come through as the clock ticks down to the impending global doom. Speaking of that doom, the Cataclysm creates a unique endgame where you lose spaces on the board one by one until there's nowhere else to go. You can practically hear the sirens. This is not one for casual gamers, but for people who are already playing those middleweight games and want to step a bit further, this is a surprisingly welcoming entry point into heavier games with a lot of knobs that you can turn to tweak the complexity as you go. And that is it. As always, we'd love to hear your thoughts or recommendations of other games along these lines, and please do like and subscribe, and hopefully we will see you all next time for another game.